Trevor Walsh had just kicked off his boots when the door chime rang. He groaned, his body aching from 3 weeks of hauling freight across the Meridian Point station routes. All he wanted was a hot shower and 12 hours of sleep. The chime rang again, more insistent this time. Yeah, I'm coming," he muttered, padding across the small apartment in his socks. When the door slid open, Trevor froze. Standing in the hallway was a child, but not a human child. She had 6 limbs, 4 of them currently wrapped around her thin body like she was trying to hold herself together. Her skin was a pale blue-gray that seemed to shimmer under the corridor lights, with darker patterns running along her face and arms. 2 large eyes, more violet than any color Trevor had seen before, stared up at him with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The child made a soft sound, almost like a bird's chirp. The translation device mounted on the hallway ceiling flickered to life, processing the noise into words. "Food. Please. Hungry." Trevor's tired brain took a moment to catch up. This was a Velhari child. He had seen adult Velhari around the station before, always walking with their heads high, never making eye contact with humans or any of the other species that lived and worked on Meridian Point. The Velhari kept to themselves, proud and distant. He had heard stories from other workers that the Velhari considered most other species beneath them, especially humans. "Hey, are you okay?" Trevor asked, crouching down to be closer to her eye level. He kept his distance, not wanting to scare her. The child's translator picked up her response. "Hungry. So hungry. Please." Trevor glanced down the hallway in both directions. Empty. Where were this kid's parents? The Velhari section of the station was 3 levels down. What was she doing up here in the human residential area? "Where's your mom?" "Your dad?" Trevor asked gently. The child just stared at him, her lower set of hands clutching her stomach. She swayed slightly, and Trevor realized she wasn't just hungry. She was starving. Every instinct told him this was a bad idea. Getting involved with Velhari business could cause problems. Their culture was complicated, full of rules he didn't understand. But looking at this kid, watching her struggle to stay on her feet, Trevor knew he couldn't just close the door. "All right, come on," he said, stepping back and gesturing inside. "Let's get you something to eat." The child hesitated at the threshold, her eyes darting from Trevor to the interior of his apartment and back again. Then, slowly she stepped inside. Trevor noticed she moved with a strange grace despite her obvious weakness, her 6 limbs coordinating in a way that seemed both alien and beautiful. "Take a seat," Trevor said, pointing to his small couch. The child perched on the edge, all 6 limbs tucked close to her body, watching his every move. Trevor pulled out his data pad as he walked to the kitchen area. He had no idea what Velhari could or couldn't eat. The last thing he needed was to accidentally poison a kid. His fingers flew across the screen, searching the station database for Velhari dietary information. The search results made him wince. Velhari biology was delicate. They couldn't process most proteins that humans ate, and certain vegetables would make them violently sick. But there was a list of safe foods, and Trevor scanned his small kitchen to see what he had. Rice. Plain vegetables. Some kind of grain paste that the database said was actually pretty close to a traditional Velhari food. It wasn't much, but it was safe. "What's your name?" Trevor asked as he started preparing the food. He kept his voice soft, like he was talking to a scared animal. "Scylla," the translator said after the child made a series of musical sounds. "I'm Trevor. Nice to meet you, Scylla." The child watched him with those huge violet eyes as he moved around the kitchen. Trevor heated water for the rice, chopped vegetables into small pieces, and mixed the grain paste with a bit of water to make it easier to swallow. It wasn't fancy cooking, but he worked carefully, checking and double-checking the database to make sure everything was safe. The smell of cooking food filled the small apartment. Trevor glanced over and saw Scylla leaning forward, her whole body tensed toward the kitchen. She was trembling. "Almost ready," he said gently. "Just a few more minutes." When the food was done, Trevor arranged it on a plate and brought it to her. He set it on the low table in front of the couch and stepped back, giving her space. Scylla stared at the plate for a long moment. Then she looked up at Trevor, and he could have sworn he saw tears in those alien eyes. "It's okay," Trevor said. "Go ahead. Eat." Scylla didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed the food with her upper hands and ate like she hadn't seen a meal in days. Maybe she hadn't. Trevor watched, concerned by how fast she was eating. "Hey, slow down a little," he said. "You'll make yourself sick." Scylla paused, looked at him, then continued eating but at a slightly slower pace. Trevor sat down in the chair across from her, giving her space but staying close enough that she wouldn't feel abandoned. As she ate, Trevor studied her. She was small, probably the equivalent of a 7 or 8-year-old human child. Her clothes were clean but worn, and he noticed they hung loose on her frame. The luminescent patterns on her skin seemed dimmer than they should be, like a light running on a dying battery. "Where do you live, Scylla?" Trevor asked quietly. The child paused in her eating, her translator processing her response. "Lower levels. With mother." "Does your mother know you're here?" Scylla's head dipped down, a gesture that looked almost like shame. She didn't answer. Trevor sighed. This was definitely complicated. But the kid was eating, and that was something. He could figure out the rest later. Scylla finished every bite on the plate, then looked up at Trevor with an expression he couldn't quite read. She made a soft sound, and the translator spoke. "Thank you." "You're welcome," Trevor said, smiling. "Do you want some water?" Before Scylla could answer, she suddenly stood up. Her whole body went rigid, and she looked toward the door with what seemed like panic in her eyes. "Scylla? What's wrong?" Without warning, the child bolted. She moved faster than Trevor expected, darting past him and out the open door before he could react. By the time he reached the hallway, she was gone, disappeared around a corner with that strange, graceful speed. Trevor stood in his doorway, staring at the empty corridor. His mind raced with questions. Was she okay? Would she make it home safely? Had he done something wrong? Should he try to find her? He stepped back inside and looked at the empty plate on his table. Whatever had just happened, at least the kid had eaten. At least she wasn't hungry anymore for now. Trevor closed the door and leaned against it, wondering if he would ever see the strange Velhari child again. Trevor had just stepped out of the shower when the door chime rang again. He wrapped a towel around his waist and grabbed a shirt, pulling it on as he walked to the door. When it opened, he found himself staring at Scylla once more. But this time she wasn't alone. Standing behind the child was a tall, slender Velhari woman. She had the same pale blue-gray skin as Scylla, the same violet eyes, but where the child's features were soft and round, this woman's face was sharp and drawn. Her 6 limbs hung at her sides in a way that spoke of exhaustion, and her body was painfully thin beneath the flowing garments that marked traditional Velhari dress. What caught Trevor's attention most were the markings on her face. He had seen Velhari adults before, always adorned with intricate tattoos that covered their foreheads and cheeks in bold, dark patterns. This woman had those same tattoos, but they were faded, the lines blurred and pale like old scars. Even without understanding Velhari culture deeply, Trevor could tell something was very wrong. The woman looked at him for a long moment, then did something Trevor had never seen a Velhari do. She bowed. Not a small nod of the head, but a deep, formal bow that brought her upper body nearly parallel with the floor. It was a gesture of profound humility. "Please," the translator crackled to life, processing her words. "I am Naveen. This is my daughter, Scylla. I have come to thank you for your kindness and to apologize for my child disturbing you." Trevor held up his hands. No, it's okay. She wasn't disturbing me. I was happy to help." Naveen straightened, and Trevor could see her hands trembling. The woman's pride was evident in the way she held herself, spine straight despite her obvious weakness. But her eyes betrayed everything. They were hollow with hunger and something deeper, a bone-deep weariness that made Trevor's chest ache. "You showed mercy to one who had no right to ask it," Naveen continued. Her voice was formal, each word carefully chosen. "Among my people, to accept help from those not of our kind is considered a mark of shame. Yet my daughter came to you in desperation, and you did not turn her away." Trevor glanced down at Scylla, who was watching her mother with worried eyes. The child's upper hands were clasped together, and she swayed slightly from foot to foot. "Listen," Trevor said, keeping his voice gentle. "I don't know much about Velhari customs, but I know a hungry kid when I see one. I'm just glad I could help. But can I ask, why was she so hungry? Where do you folks live?" Naveen's face tightened, a flash of something, pain, shame, anger, crossing her features. "We live in the lower residential levels. 3 months ago, my husband was killed in an accident at the docking bay where he worked. He was our household's provider, as is proper in Velhari tradition." She paused, and Trevor could see how much it cost her to continue. "Among my people, when a husband dies, the widow must prove she can maintain the household alone. If she cannot, she loses her status. She becomes nothing." Trevor felt his stomach drop. "And you lost your status?" "Yes." The word was barely a whisper. "Without status, I cannot access our community's food distribution centers. I cannot find work that pays enough to feed both myself and my child. Our people believe that if I cannot support my household, I do not deserve the support of our community. It is meant to encourage strength and self-reliance." That's insane, Trevor said before he could stop himself. He immediately regretted it, but Naveen didn't seem offended. Perhaps, she said quietly. But it is our way. I have tried everything. I took work cleaning waste recyclers, scrubbing air filtration systems, any job that would hire one of my kind. But the pay is so little and the costs are so high. We have been eating less and less. Yesterday we had nothing. Scylla was so hungry she could not sleep. Scylla made a small sound and pressed closer to her mother. Naveen's lower hands reached down to rest on her daughter's shoulders. She left our quarters without telling me, Naveen continued. When she returned, she told me of the kind human who fed her. She begged me to come with her, to meet you. I came to thank you and to tell you that we will not trouble you again. My pride has already fallen so far. I will not drag it lower by begging from strangers. Trevor looked at the woman standing in his doorway, head held high despite everything, and made a decision. When's the last time you ate? Naveen blinked, clearly not expecting the question. 2 days ago. But that is not your concern. I did not come here for... Yeah, I know you didn't, Trevor interrupted gently. But I'm asking anyway. 2 days is a long time. And looking at you, I'm guessing it's been longer than that since you had a real meal. I do not need your charity, Naveen said, but her voice wavered. It's not charity. It's just food. Trevor stepped back from the doorway. Look, I've got stuff in the kitchen that I checked is safe for Velhari to eat. I already made some for Scylla earlier. Takes me 5 minutes to make more. You can stand out in that hallway and keep your pride, or you can come in and eat something. Your choice. Naveen stood frozen, her whole body tense with internal conflict. Trevor could see the war happening behind her eyes, pride battling against desperate need. Then Scylla tugged on her mother's garment and made a soft, pleading sound. The translator didn't catch the exact words, but the meaning was clear. Please, mother. Please. Naveen's shoulders sagged. She stopped, swallowed hard. My daughter has not eaten a proper meal in so long. If you truly do not mind. I don't mind at all, Trevor said, smiling. Come on in. Naveen entered the apartment like she was walking to her own execution. Every movement was stiff, controlled, as if she was forcing herself forward through sheer will. Scylla stayed close to her mother's side, her small hands gripping the fabric of Naveen's clothes. Trevor guided them to the couch and then headed to the kitchen. He pulled out the same ingredients he had used before, plus a few extras. If Naveen hadn't eaten in 2 days, she needed more than just rice and vegetables. As he cooked, Trevor snuck glances at his guests. Naveen sat perfectly upright, her hands folded in her lap. But those hands were shaking. Not just a small tremor, but visible shaking that she couldn't control. Scylla sat pressed against her mother's side, watching Trevor with those big violet eyes. So you worked in waste recycling? Trevor asked, trying to make conversation. That's tough work. It is work, Naveen replied stiffly. I am grateful to have had it, even if it was not enough. What did you do before? Before your husband died? There was a long pause. I managed household accounts and resources. It is traditional work for high-status Velhari women. I was good at details, at organization. Trevor filed that information away as he plated the food. When he brought 2 full plates to the table, Naveen stared at them like they were precious jewels. Please, Trevor said. Eat. Naveen's trembling hands reached for the food, and Trevor saw a single tear roll down her cheek, cutting through the faded status markings like a river through dry earth. Trevor couldn't sleep that night. He kept thinking about Naveen and Scylla, about the way Naveen's hands had shaken as she ate, about the faded markings on her face that told a story of loss and shame. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling until finally he gave up, grabbed his datapad and started searching. The station's employment database was massive, but Trevor knew how to navigate it. He had helped his cousin Claire hire workers for Walsh Freight Collective before. He started reading through the regulations looking for something, anything that might help. 2 hours later he found it. Human employment law on Meridian Point was clear and simple. Employers could hire anyone of any species as long as they met basic job requirements. There was nothing about social status, nothing about cultural restrictions, nothing that would prevent a Velhari woman from working for a human company. Trevor sat up in bed, his heart racing. This could work. This could actually work. Walsh Freight Collective wasn't big, just a small operation that his cousin Claire had built from nothing. They handled cargo logistics, managed warehouse inventory, and coordinated shipments between different parts of the station. It was steady work, honest work, and it paid decent wages. The moment the station clock hit a reasonable hour, Trevor called Claire. This better be important. Claire's voice came through the calm, thick with sleep. I was having a really good dream about a beach somewhere. I need to ask you something, Trevor said. About hiring someone. Trevor, we're not looking for anyone right now. Budget's tight as it is. Just hear me out. Trevor took a deep breath and told her everything. About Scylla showing up at his door, about Naveen and her faded status markings, about the Velhari system that left widows and orphans to starve. There was silence on the other end for a long moment. Then Claire sighed. You want me to hire a Velhari woman who's been blacklisted by her own people? She's good with details and organization. She managed household accounts before. That's exactly what we need for inventory management. You've been complaining for months that we keep losing track of shipments. That's because I've been doing inventory myself and I'm terrible at it, Claire admitted. But Trevor, this could get complicated. Cultural stuff always does. I checked the laws. There's nothing stopping us. And Claire, you should see this kid. She's starving. They both are. Another long silence. Trevor knew his cousin well enough to know she was thinking it through, weighing the risks against her own sense of right and wrong. All right, Claire finally said. Bring her by the warehouse tomorrow. Let me meet her first. No promises, but I'll talk to her. Thank you, Trevor said, relief flooding through him. I owe you. Yeah, you do. And I'm collecting. You're covering my shift next week. Trevor spent the rest of the morning trying to figure out how to find Naveen. She had mentioned the lower residential levels, but that covered a huge area. He was about to start searching door to door when his apartment chime rang. Scylla stood in the hallway alone this time. She looked better than yesterday, more color in her skin, less trembling in her limbs. Is your mother with you? Trevor asked. Scylla shook her head and made a series of sounds. The translator converted them. Mother is sleeping. She was very tired. I came to say thank you again. Trevor crouched down to Scylla's level. Actually, I'm glad you're here. I wanted to talk to your mother about something. Can you take me to where you live? Scylla's eyes widened with what looked like fear. Our home is not nice. It is small and dark. That's okay. I just need to talk to her. It's important. It's good news. The child studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. Follow me. The lower residential levels were nothing like the upper areas where Trevor lived. The corridors were narrower, the lighting dimmer, and the air had a stale quality that made Trevor's nose wrinkle. Scylla led him through a maze of hallways until she stopped at a door that looked like all the others. She pressed her hand to the panel and the door slid open. The room beyond was tiny, barely large enough for two people. There was a sleeping mat in one corner, a small table, and almost nothing else. Naveen was sitting on the mat, her back against the wall, her eyes closed. Mother, Scylla said softly. The human Trevor is here. Naveen's eyes snapped open. She stood quickly, smoothing her clothes, trying to compose herself. Trevor. I did not expect. Is something wrong? No, nothing's wrong, Trevor said quickly. I wanted to talk to you about something. A job opportunity. He explained about Walsh Freight Collective, about the inventory management position, about how human employment laws would allow her to work there regardless of her Velhari status. As he spoke, he watched Naveen's face cycle through emotions. Confusion, hope, fear, and finally a deep, terrible understanding. You are offering me work with humans, she said slowly. Permanent work. Yeah. Good work. It pays enough to support you and Scylla. You'd have benefits, housing assistance, everything. And if I accept this work, I will be forever cast out from my people. Naveen's voice was flat, emotionless. To work for another species, to accept their charity, to become dependent on them, this is the ultimate shame for a Velhari. I would be declaring that I am not strong enough to survive by our ways. I would be admitting complete failure. Trevor hadn't thought about it like that. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to. Do you know what they will say about me? Naveen continued, her voice rising. That I am weak. That I am a traitor to our traditions. That I have abandoned everything our people stand for. Any Velhari who still acknowledged me would lose their own status. I would be alone. Completely alone. Scylla made a small sound and grabbed her mother's hand. Naveen looked down at her daughter and her expression cracked. But if I refuse, Naveen whispered, I watch my child waste away. I watch her grow weaker each day. I watch her suffer because I am too proud to accept help. Mother, Scylla said, her small voice clear through the translator. I do not care what other Velhari think. I care that you are happy. I care that we have food. The human Trevor showed us kindness when our own people showed nothing. Is that not worth more than status marks? Naveen knelt down and pulled Scylla close, wrapping all 6 of her limbs around her daughter. Trevor could see her shoulders shaking. "You would have me give up everything," Naveen said, but she wasn't talking to Trevor anymore. She was talking to herself. "My culture, my people, my identity. Everything I was raised to be." "You'd still be you," Trevor said quietly. "Just you with a job and a future for your kid." Naveen was quiet for a long time, holding Scylla, rocking slightly back and forth. When she finally spoke, her voice was hoarse. "When can I meet your cousin?" "Tomorrow. I can take you to the warehouse tomorrow." "Then I will come." Naveen raised her head, and Trevor saw tears streaming down her face, cutting through those faded status markings. "I choose my daughter. I choose survival. I choose mercy over pride." She looked at Trevor with eyes full of grief and relief all mixed together. "Thank you for showing me that such a choice is possible." Naveen's first day at Walsh Freight Collective started with awkward silence. The human workers at the warehouse didn't know how to act around her. They had never worked alongside a Velhari before. Most had barely spoken to one. They nodded politely when Claire introduced her, then quickly returned to their tasks, stealing glances when they thought she wasn't looking. Naveen didn't seem to notice or care. She stood in front of the inventory terminal, her 4 upper limbs moving across the controls with practiced precision while her lower limbs kept her perfectly balanced. Her violet eyes scanned the screens with intense focus, absorbing information at a speed that made Trevor blink in surprise. "The system is disorganized," Naveen said after 20 minutes. "Items are categorized inconsistently. The tracking numbers don't follow a logical pattern. No wonder you lose shipments." Claire looked at Trevor with raised eyebrows. "Well, she's not wrong." "Give me 3 days," Naveen said. "I can create a new organizational system. Everything will be easier to track." She worked for 12 hours straight that first day. Trevor brought her lunch and she ate while standing at the terminal, her eyes never leaving the screen. When the shift ended, the other workers filed out quickly, but Naveen stayed another hour, making notes and sketching out plans on a data pad. By the end of her first week, the warehouse inventory system had been completely reorganized. Shipments that used to take an hour to locate now took 5 minutes. The error rate in tracking dropped noticeably. Claire started assigning Naveen more responsibilities, and Naveen accepted each one with quiet determination. The other workers slowly began to warm up to her. A man named Greg started bringing an extra sandwich each day and leaving it near Naveen's workstation. A woman named Paula asked Naveen questions about the Velhari homeworld, genuinely curious. Naveen answered in short, careful sentences, still keeping some distance, but the ice was melting. 4 weeks into her employment, the crisis happened. It was late in the evening and most of the warehouse crew had gone home. Naveen was finishing up some paperwork when an alert flashed on her terminal. A shipment scheduled to leave for the mining colony on the station's outer rim had been flagged for departure. Naveen pulled up the details and felt her blood run cold. The shipment was labeled as industrial equipment, but something was wrong with the container codes. She cross-referenced the numbers with the master inventory and found the problem. Someone had mislabeled the cargo. What was supposed to be industrial equipment was actually medical supplies, including critical medicines for an outbreak of respiratory illness at the mining colony. The real industrial equipment, useless for treating sick people, was sitting in a different container ready to be loaded instead. Naveen's hands flew across the controls. The cargo transport was scheduled to launch in 6 hours. If the wrong container went out, people would die. The mining colony was 3 days away by standard transport. By the time anyone realized the mistake and sent the correct supplies, it would be too late. She immediately sent an emergency message to Claire and Trevor, then got to work. Tracking down the error meant going through weeks of shipping records, finding where the mislabeling had occurred, and making sure no other shipments had been affected. Her Velhari biology gave her an advantage here. She could function on minimal sleep, her mind staying sharp even as exhaustion pulled at her limbs. Trevor arrived at the warehouse 2 hours later to find Naveen still at the terminal, surrounded by datapads and screens full of information. "How bad is it?" he asked. "Bad. The mislabeling happened 16 days ago. This is the first shipment where it would have caused a problem, but there could be others." Naveen didn't look away from her work. "I need to check everything. Every shipment that went through this system in the past 3 weeks. That'll take all night. Then it takes all night." Naveen's voice was firm. "People are sick. They need these medicines. I will not let them suffer because of a clerical error." Trevor called Claire, who called in 2 other workers to help. But it was Naveen who led the effort, her mind cutting through the chaos of data like a blade. By dawn, she had traced every error, corrected every mislabeled shipment, and created a new verification system to prevent it from happening again. The medical supplies reached the mining colony on time. 16 lives were saved that would have been lost. Station management sent an official commendation. Claire called a company meeting to publicly thank Naveen for her work. The other warehouse workers, who had been polite but distant, now greeted her warmly each morning. Naveen remained formal and reserved, but Trevor could see the change in her eyes. She was beginning to feel like she belonged. Then the Velhari delegation arrived. Trevor was helping Naveen organize a shipment when 3 Velhari walked into the warehouse. They were all male, all wearing the elaborate robes that marked high status, all bearing bold, dark facial markings that screamed of pride and position. Workers stopped what they were doing, sensing trouble. The lead Velhari looked at Naveen with open disgust. His translator crackled to life. "Naveen, daughter of Keleth. We have come to witness your shame with our own eyes." Naveen straightened, her whole body going rigid. "I am working. If you wish to speak with me, you may wait until my shift ends." "We do not wish to speak. We wish to see what you have become." The Velhari gestured around the warehouse with one of his upper hands. "Look at you. Working alongside these lesser beings. Taking their charity. Debasing yourself for their coin. Have you no dignity left?" Scylla had been doing homework in the corner of the warehouse, a small space Claire had set up for her after school. Now she stood up, her young face twisted with anger. "You dare speak of dignity?" Naveen's voice cut through the warehouse like a whip. She stepped forward, away from her terminal, facing the delegation head-on. "Where was Velhari dignity when my daughter was starving? Where was the honor of our people when I begged for help and received only turned backs?" The lead Velhari's markings seemed to darken. "You failed to maintain your household. That is not our fault." "I did not fail," Naveen said, her voice rising. "My husband died. I worked every job I could find. I scraped and saved every credit. And still, it was not enough because our people decided I was not worthy of basic compassion." She took another step forward, and Trevor noticed the other warehouse workers had moved closer, forming a loose circle around them. Not threatening but present. Supporting. "These humans." Naveen gestured to the people around her. "They showed me more honor than any Velhari. They judged me on my work, not my status markings. They valued my skills, not my husband's name. They fed my child when she was hungry without demanding anything in return. Tell me which is more dignified, letting a child starve to preserve tradition, or offering help to those in need?" The Velhari delegation stood silent, clearly not expecting this response. They had come to shame Naveen, to reinforce her exile, but she was not cowering. She was standing tall, her faded markings somehow more powerful than their bold ones. Scylla walked over to stand beside her mother. The child looked up at the delegation and spoke in clear Velhari, her voice strong. Then she switched to human speech so everyone could understand. "My mother has more courage than all of you. She chose life over pride. She chose love over tradition. And I am proud to be her daughter." The lead Velhari made a disgusted sound. "You are both lost to us. May you find whatever hollow satisfaction this degradation brings." The delegation turned and left, their robes sweeping behind them dramatically. The warehouse door slid shut and silence fell. Then Greg started clapping. Paula joined in. Within seconds, every human in the warehouse was applauding. Naveen stood frozen, clearly not understanding what was happening. "That," Claire said, walking over with a huge grin, "was the most impressive thing I've ever seen." Naveen looked around at all the humans surrounding her, at their smiling faces and their applause. She looked down at Scylla, who was beaming with pride. And for the first time since Trevor had met her, Naveen smiled. A real, genuine smile that made her whole face light up. "I am not lost," she said quietly. "I think perhaps I have been found." 6 months had changed everything. Naveen now held the title of Logistics Coordinator at Walsh Freight Collective, managing not just inventory but entire supply chains across 3 sections of Meridian Point Station. She had her own small office, though she rarely used it, preferring to work alongside the warehouse crew. Her apartment in the lower levels had been replaced by modest quarters in the mid-level residential area, close to a good school where Scylla thrived. But the biggest change wasn't in Naveen's circumstances. It was in what she and Trevor had built together. It started small. A young Velhari man named Torin appeared at the warehouse one evening, thin and desperate, asking if the rumors were true that a human company had hired a statusless Velhari. Naveen had spoken with him quietly, then brought him to Claire. Torin became the second Velhari employee at Walsh Freight Collective. Then came a widow named Dessa with 3 children, all of them hollow-eyed with hunger. Then a Velhari who had been injured and could no longer do heavy labor. Then another and another. Word spread through the lower levels that there was a place where Velhari who had fallen through the cracks of their own society could find help. Trevor and Naveen quickly realized the warehouse couldn't employ everyone who needed assistance. So they started making calls. Trevor reached out to other human business owners he knew. Naveen, swallowing her remaining pride, contacted Velhari who worked in other species companies, those who had already made the difficult choice to leave their culture behind. They called it the bridge because that's what it was. A connection between those who needed help and those who could provide it. Between old ways and new possibilities. Between species that had lived on the same station for years without truly seeing each other. What began as Trevor and Naveen working from a corner of the warehouse grew into something bigger. Other humans joined the effort, offering job leads, donating food, providing translation services. A few brave Velhari who had found stability began mentoring newcomers, teaching them how to navigate life outside the rigid structure of their traditional society. Paula from the warehouse started a tutoring program for Velhari children struggling in integrated schools. Greg organized a group that helped Velhari families find better housing. Claire donated warehouse space for weekly gatherings where people could share meals and resources. Within 3 months, the bridge had helped 47 Velhari individuals and families. Within 5 months, that number had doubled. The traditional Velhari leadership tried to interfere. They sent delegations, issued proclamations, declared that any Velhari who participated in the bridge would be permanently exiled from their community. But their threats rang hollow. The Velhari who came to the bridge had already been abandoned by their community. They had nothing left to lose and everything to gain. The turning point came when the station council called a hearing. The traditional Velhari leaders had filed a formal complaint, claiming the bridge was undermining their cultural autonomy and encouraging their people to abandon sacred traditions. They demanded the council shut it down. Trevor sat in the council chamber alongside Naveen, Claire, and a dozen others who had helped build the bridge. Across the aisle, 5 Velhari elders in elaborate robes sat with expressions of stern disapproval. The council chamber was packed with observers, both human and Velhari. The lead elder spoke first, his translator rendering his formal speech into human language. The bridge is a corruption. It teaches our people that weakness is acceptable, that failure deserves reward, that tradition can be discarded when it becomes inconvenient. These humans interfere in matters they do not understand, destroying the foundations of our society. He went on for 20 minutes, painting the bridge as a destructive force that would eventually erode all Velhari culture until nothing remained. When he finished, the council chair turned to Trevor and Naveen. "You may respond." Trevor started to stand, but Naveen touched his arm. "Let them speak," she said quietly. "Let our people tell their own stories." Trevor looked confused until he saw who Naveen was gesturing to. In the gallery, a young Velhari woman stood up. She was barely 20, her status markings faded like Naveen's had been. "My name is Kessa," she said, her voice shaking but determined. 8 months ago, my parents died in a transport accident. I was told I must marry quickly or lose my status because an unmarried woman cannot maintain a household alone. I did not wish to marry someone I did not know just to preserve social standing. I was cast out. I was starving. I considered ending my life because I saw no other choice." Her voice grew stronger. "Then I heard about the bridge. These humans and brave Velhari like Naveen helped me find work. They helped me find housing. They showed me that my life had value even without status markings. I am alive because of them. And I choose life with dignity over death with honor." Another Velhari stood. Then another. One by one they told their stories. A father whose child had a disability that traditional Velhari medicine couldn't treat. A young man who questioned the rigid gender roles of his culture. An elderly Velhari who had devoted 40 years to her community only to be discarded when she could no longer work. Each story was different, but the theme was the same. The traditional system had failed them, and the bridge had given them a second chance. The council deliberated for 2 hours. When they returned, the decision was clear. Not only would the bridge be allowed to continue, but the council would implement new anti-discrimination protections. No organization on Meridian Point Station could deny housing, employment, or basic services based on social status within a specific culture's hierarchy. The Velhari elders left the chamber in angry silence. But in the gallery, humans and Velhari alike were cheering. That evening, Naveen hosted a celebration in the community space that the bridge had recently acquired. The room was filled with the smell of food from a dozen different cultures. Velhari dishes sat alongside human cooking, and people moved freely between tables, talking and laughing. Scylla ran through the crowd with 3 other Velhari children and 2 human kids, playing some game that involved a lot of shrieking and giggling. She had grown in the past 6 months, her skin brighter, her limbs stronger. She looked healthy and happy. Trevor stood near the refreshment table, watching the celebration, when Naveen approached him. She had changed her appearance over the months. Her faded status markings were still there, but she had added new patterns of her own design, simple lines that held no traditional meaning but looked beautiful. She wore a mix of Velhari and human clothing, creating her own style. "This is strange," Naveen said, looking around the room. "6 months ago I believed my life was over. I thought I had lost everything that mattered. And now?" Trevor asked. "Now I see that I was wrong about what mattered." Naveen turned to face him, her violet eyes serious. "Do you remember the first night when you fed Scylla? You gave her food, yes. But you gave her something more important. You gave her dignity. You saw a hungry child, not a shameful Velhari who had no right to ask for help. You saw a person." Trevor felt his throat tighten. Anyone would have done the same. "No." Naveen shook her head firmly. "Not anyone. Many would have closed the door. Many would have called station security. Many would have worried about cultural complications or social consequences. But you saw a child who needed help and you helped. That simple act of seeing people, truly seeing them, is humanity's greatest strength." She gestured around the room at the mixed crowd of humans and Velhari. "You showed me that honor does not live in status markings or ancient traditions. Honor lives in compassion. In choosing kindness over protocol. In valuing life over pride. These are human values and they saved me." "They're not just human values," Trevor said. "Look around. Half the people running the bridge are Velhari. They chose the same things you did. Because you showed us it was possible to choose." Naveen smiled, that bright smile that still surprised Trevor every time he saw it. "You built a bridge, Trevor. Not just an organization with that name, but a real bridge between what we were and what we could become." Across the room, Scylla called out to her mother, wanting her to try some kind of fusion dessert the kids had created by mixing human and Velhari sweets together. Naveen laughed and excused herself, moving through the crowd with easy confidence. Trevor watched her go, watched all these people who had found each other across cultural divides, and felt a deep sense of peace. He thought about that first night, about opening his door to find a starving child. Such a small moment. Such a simple choice. But small moments could change everything. Simple choices could build bridges. Claire appeared at his elbow, holding 2 cups of something purple and fizzy. "You look way too serious for a party. Here, drink this. I have no idea what it is, but Torin promised it won't kill humans." Trevor took the cup and raised it in a mock toast. "To building bridges. To feeding hungry kids," Claire countered. "To seeing people instead of protocols," Naveen called from across the room, having somehow heard them. All around them, voices joined in, human and Velhari together, raising cups and glasses and calling out their own toasts. To new families. To second chances. To courage and compassion. To the simple act of opening a door instead of closing it. To the bridge and everything it represented. Outside the celebration space, Meridian Point Station continued its endless rotation, humans and Velhari and a dozen other species living and working in their separate communities. But in this room on this night the walls had come down. And that small miracle had started with one man feeding one hungry child. Sometimes, Trevor thought, the most human thing you could do was simply to care. Everything else built itself from there.